Hey, welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks, as always, for sticking me in your ear. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, I suggest you check out my premium subscription program. Just go to the episode description and click on that link. It's strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. There are 3 monthly programs to choose from. Choose the one that's right for you, but you gain access to commercial-free listening, special bonus episodes, and you even receive a subscription to my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Could a 3,000-year-old calendar of appointed days provide the secret to the most dramatic year of our lives, even ordaining a plague, a national lockdown, days of fire, and the changing of the Supreme Court? Could an ancient temple, an ominous prayer, and a mysterious template lie behind the event that overtook Capitol Hill and shook the nation? Could an enigmatic ancient king reveal the secret of a modern American president? My guest's latest book takes readers on a prophetic journey from a Caribbean island to the Washington, D.C. area, to the ancient valley of Hinnom, to the Supreme Court, to a desert mountain, to an ancient Middle Eastern temple, to the gates of America, to uncover an ancient puzzle that lies behind the events that have altered our lives. Jonathan Cahn is known for his uncovering of ancient mysteries and revealing their often startling significance to our day and age. Jonathan's teachings and messages are broadcast daily throughout the United States and the world. He's a spiritual leader of the Hope of the World Ministry in Jerusalem Center in Wayne, New Jersey. He is a 7-time best-selling author. His works include The Harbinger, The Mystery of the Shemitah, The Book of Mysteries, The Paradigm, The Oracle, The Harbinger II, and his brand new one, The Josiah Manifesto, The Ancient Mystery and Guide for the End Times. Jonathan Cahn, welcome back. How are you?
Good to be back. It seems like we were just together. It's great to be back.
You know, there's always an interesting backstory whenever I ask you about, writing these books, and oftentimes they entail some spiritual warfare. I know a couple of times in the midst of writing a book, you suddenly fell ill. Anything happened during the writing and the researching of the Josiah Manifesto?
Well, usually, Richard, it happens on the day of the release, which has, so we're right around that time, so pray nothing does. But yeah, the only times I've been in the hospital in my life, for overnight, actually for a week, one was on the days of the release, and one was a mysterious infection that paralyzed me. It was an infection. The other was my appendix burst. Another time we had Hurricane Irene flooded our ministry center with 4 feet of water. I mean, it's been like that. I mean, I'm praying nothing happens this time, but there is warfare.
I'm praying right alongside you.
Yeah.
All right. So what is this new book going to reveal? The Josiah Manifesto.
Yeah. Well, I would put it this way. What if God was revealing the prophetic moment we were at right now? What is lying ahead? Have we been given a last chance? And what if he was giving us the key or the blueprint, a guide for what lies ahead, for the end times, and really what we need to know to stand, to prevail in the days ahead? What if the hand of God was behind the events of our time, some of the most dramatic events? I mean, from COVID to the disorder, the division of America, the riots, what's happened in the White House, what's happened in the Supreme Court, and really everything that's happening right now to our culture. What if there were actual ancient mysteries that determined what would happen? You mentioned an ancient calendar. What if there was an ancient calendar that actually determines the exact days, the dates of when the shakings of America and the world have happened, and that determine what is going to happen? And so the Josiah Manifesto is going to open up all this. I mean, the last part of it is actually a guide to the end times, what this opens up. But also, in many ways, those who know my books, from The Harbinger to The Return of the Gods, in many ways, the mysteries that began there are converging and coming together in the Josiah Manifesto to open up really the final blueprint. So I believe this is really among the most crucial or critical things I could have ever written.
The calendar, as it pertains to the arrival of the plague, COVID-19, on America's shores, is absolutely chilling. So let's dive in right here, and let's begin with the arrival of COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the Bible, there's a few keys, and one of them is the key that whatever a nation does to its children is going to come back to it. Jeremiah overlooked the valley of Hinnom, where the people of Israel were offering up their children, and he said, because of what you did, the blood of the children, it's coming back to you. And basically, it led to the nation's destruction, a great calamity. And one of the forms it takes is the form in the Bible is the form of a plague to answer that. So the question now, we deal with the plague that was just upon us, and for the last really 3 years. And the other kind of puzzle piece of the mystery is the Jubilee. And the Jubilee is one of God's timetables. And that is every 50 years, basically, everything is undone. And you know, it's a good thing if you lost your land or if you were in slavery, it's all undone. But it can also be a time of restitution and undoing in the form of judgment. And so now let's put it all together. COVID, well, actually, even before we go to COVID, America, and America really led much of the West into the sin of abortion, the killing of unborn children. We've killed over 60 million of them so far. Well, it began not in 1973, it began in 1970. So that's when abortion on demand entered America. So what happens if we go to the 50th year? Could there be another death that, in a sense, answers it? Well, what happens is it takes you to the Jubilean year of abortion is 2020. That's the beginning of it. And so what happened? A death, a plague comes to America and to the world, but particularly it focuses on America. Interesting. But the other thing is that the day that abortion began its entrance in America, it's the day it appeared in the New York legislature, which is really where it came into the continent. And the date was January 20th, 1970. Fast forward, that pinpoints 2020, the date, January 20th. Did anything happen? January 20th, 2020 is the day that the plague officially entered American soil. It's the day of patient zero. And that's the beginning of it. But it even goes, I mean, that's just the beginning, Richard. It's gonna affect every point is gonna be exact.
So when these dates, these parallel dates are revealing themselves, and the Jubilee, Jan 20th, 1970, abortion is legalized in New York. Jan 20th.
That's when it enters that's when the bill comes to the legislature.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah. Jan 20th, 2020. COVID in America. When these dates are popping out at you, I mean, I know you're a man of deep faith, but still, you must still be like totally amazed when these dates are being revealed to you.
Yeah, I'm people ask me that, like, I am the first one to be blown away. I'm blown away as much as anybody, because, even though I guess I should be used to it, in one sense, because these things, it just never stops. I'm never used to it, because God is quite amazing and God is real. I mean, we know in our heads he's real, but the fact is, even if you're an atheist, he's real. It's affecting everything. Another example, the date that the media gave for, so they call it the day that changed everything. It was when, not when the first entrance, it's when everything hit. I mean, everything hit. And it's the day that America was quarantined. It was in the middle of March. It was the day that the stock market crashed, ended the bear market of years. It was the day that Donald Trump appeared on television announcing the pandemic, all the lockdowns began, everything. Well, the date the date is March 11th, 2020. You can look it up. You'll call it the day that changed everything. Well, go back 50 years, and is there anything significant? March 11th, 50 years before Jubilee, 1970 is the day that abortion on demand actually began on American soil. So that's the day that it fell on America, and that's the day the plague fell on America, 50 years, one Jubilee year to the exact date.
You mentioned the Valley of Hinnom and Jeremiah basically proclaiming a curse on ancient Israel because of the sacrificing of babies. This would be to the
Yeah.
god Baal, correct? And at that time, I guess with was it Jezebel, Queen Jezebel, they had embraced the old Canaan religions, including Baal.
Yeah, it was Baal, and actually in the Return of the Gods, Baal and Moloch. Those were the two gods particularly linked to the offering of children. And so interesting, when America, that's when Israel turned away from God. When America and the West turned away from God, in the late 20th century into the 21st century, what did we start doing? We start offering our children in the form of abortion.
Right. And then there was also this, I think it was either a recreation of the arch of the Temple of Baal was touring North America, and it was in New York. I don't know about the timing of it, but that was interesting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because interesting, because when it came to New York, which is really the center. We talk about the Valley of Hinnom. New York is the Valley of Hinnom of America. That is where abortion entered America, the continent of America, in 1970. And it's also the place that became the capital. It's literally the abortion capital of America. I mean, so that is New York, and so the Arch of Baal, which is the Temple of Baal, which is we're going to see it's going to come up in another kind of mystery here when we get to Jehu, but that actually appeared in New York, and they had a ceremony. I was there, Richard. We actually filmed it. We put it on video so people could see this. They had a ceremony. The leaders of New York had a ceremony around the Arch of Baal, which is a sign of a nation that once knew God and has turned away from God and now has offered its children. This kind of converges everything, the return of the gods, everything. When you turn away from God, this is what happens. So Jeremiah, when he is prophesying over the Valley of Hinnom, he said that the judgment is going to come back to where you killed the children. The blood or the slaughter will come back. You'll be killed where you kill the children. So could this apply now? If you take what is the Valley of Hinnom of America and much of the world, actually, it's New York. And so here's what would we expect to happen? Well, the plague literally comes to America and actually focused on America more than any other nation, coincidentally, and then in America, it turns its focus to one little sliver of land, and that's New York. So much so that at that time when the plague hit, that time, 1 out of every 3 cases in the world were in America. 1 out of every 2 of those cases was in New York. So now New York became the place. You remember, it was a ghost town. It was they couldn't even bury the dead. I mean, that's how crazy this was. But that's the biblical principle. But the other thing is that in the beginning of April, when this kind of began, it actually, New York passed a milestone where it now had more cases of this plague of COVID than any other nation in the world, if you can understand that. More than China, more than any other nation. And so it reached that milestone on April 10th. Well, go back 50 years, one Jubilee, and that takes you to April 10th, 1970. Anything? On that date, New York legalized the killing of children. And so 50 years to the exact date again.
What about the mystery of the gates? What is the mystery of the gates in the book?
Yeah, well, when Jeremiah gave that prophecy, he did it at the gate of, it says at the Potter's Gate, overlooking the Valley of Hinnom. They killed their children by the gate. Now, in the Bible, the gates are linked to judgment. It says judgment comes to the gate. Now, what is the gate of America? It's New York. New York is the gate. I mean, it's the gateway. It's the gate in and out. So number one, as they killed their children by the gate, America has killed its children by its gate, but also judgment comes to the gate. And interesting, because New York is not only the place where so much has come out of, darkness has come out of, but it's also the place of 9/11. It's the place of when also calamity as well. And that, so everything returns to New York, but here's the thing. It's a gate. It's not just the place that abortion, began or the plague came back to, but it's the place where abortion spread to America through. Literally, New York actually laid the groundwork of Roe versus Wade. Literally, New York spread abortion to America. In fact, Richard, so much so that in the first 3 years of abortion, up to Roe versus Wade, from 1970 to 1973, most of the abortions in America were performed in New York. from that spread all over America. They came to New York. So now, therefore, could the mystery apply to that? Well, go 50 years later to the Jubilee of this, and what do we see? What's happened? This just came out recently that they found the genetic markers of the virus, and they found that most of the infections of this plague of COVID, most of the viruses, most of it came through the gate of New York. If you were hit with a virus in America, most likely the virus in your body had the markers of the gate of New York, the gate where America had killed its children. Now there was one other gate in 1970 where abortion came to the continent. It was the West Gate. It was Washington State. Now Washington State. So you had these two gates. Now, well, did anything happen 50 years later? Yes. The two gates through which the plague came was New York and Washington State. And so if you had, now to take it further, if you were infected if you had this disease, well, the markers would either bear the Eastern Gate, the marker of the virus, the Eastern Gate, or the Western Gate, where America began killing its children exactly 50 years before.
Right. I believe patient zero was in Washington State.
Patient zero was in Washington, the Western Gate, and it was confirmed on the 50 year to the exact date that it entered the Eastern Gate, the 50 years before.
Jonathan, we'll take a quick time out and continue to talk about the Josiah Manifesto. Back with more of our conversation right here on Strange Planet. Don't go away.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.
We are back with Jonathan Cahn, and the latest book is the Josiah Manifesto. The book asks the Jeremiah question. We talked about the prophet Jeremiah. What is the Jeremiah question, and what is the answer to that question?
Yeah, Jeremiah, and you can look at it in Jeremiah 19. He prophesies over the Valley of Hinnom, and basically he says that, again, the blood of the children are going to be answered by the blood of the people who killed the children. So it's the very first kind of law of morality. This is so the question has to be, which I had to ask in the book, is what about the numbers? Could there be any correspondence? Well, in order to see that, there's 2 periods. The first period is the 3-year window where abortion began in America up to Roe versus Wade, when it became the law of the land. And so in that period, how many babies were killed? This is according to the CDC, the same CDC of COVID, and it puts it at 1.3 million children, about 1.3 million. When you go to the other window, and that's the 50-year, that's the Jubilean window, 50 years later, from 2020 to 2023, same exact window, same exact dates. The CDC and others put how many people were killed. They put it, the number by the plague was 1.3 million, the same number as the children.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you're researching this book, I mean, how do you come up with the questions that you need to research? In other words, how did it come into your head that I should find out how many babies were sacrificed during the first 3 years of legalized abortion in America, and then I should compare that to the number of deaths in the 3 years of COVID that match those dates. Did that come to you in a dream? How did it come to you?
It just comes, and the thing is interesting because when you look at, first of all, I'm looking at every date is corresponding. So if the dates are corresponding and the Bible speaks about the numbers corresponding in the Valley of Hinnom, then could this correspond this way too? And in order to do that, Richard, I had to look at all the CDC statistics for every year of all these things and get the exact dates of that. And the other thing is that, if I had to recreate how to write any book from starting with a Harbinger, I couldn't recreate it because it just starts. You're like there's a download, something says you have to search, and then that comes to the next and the next. Sometimes when I need the next thing, someone will say something or something will appear on my computer that I did not ask for, or I didn't Google, and that becomes the next thing. So I could, there are times like with a paradigm, I'm in my bed next to my wife, and all of a sudden these like three things come to me, and I say, well, could that be true? I get up, I get on my laptop in the bathroom, and all of a sudden it's all real. So I cannot recreate, how that happens, but that's how it happens. It's like I'm just led, one step to the next.
Remarkable. All right, so let's move on to January 6th.
Yes.
Of course. And here we are 2.5 years later, and we have a president who's being indicted for what transpired on Capitol Hill. What does that have to do, January 6th, what happened on Capitol Hill, Donald Trump, and this mystery have to do with this ancient calendar?
Well, this is one of the examples of a previous mystery that's kind of coming home or landing here in the Josiah Manifesto. This begins with a paradigm. The book I wrote, this came true after the paradigm. And to set the stage, what the paradigm is saying is that, God gives these templates and speaks to us through them. And the amazing thing is that the leaders of our time are actually following these templates without realizing it, based on these ancient prototypes. And I will just mention this one about Donald Trump. He is following, with regard to America, he's following the template of Jehu. Jehu was a wild guy. He was fighting with everybody. He was, if he had a Twitter account, I'm sure he would have been tweeting at night. But the point is, he was unpredictable, and he had a wild race to the throne. And he ends up making an alliance with the religious conservatives of the land. This is Jehu. This is Trump. Yes. And finally he comes to a showdown with the nation's former first lady. And this was Jezebel in the time of, ancient times. In modern times, it was Hillary Clinton. Interesting, because we mentioned this, but Jezebel was for Baal worship, which is the sacrifice of children. Hillary Clinton was voted Planned Parenthood's abortion champion of the century. And one of the conflicts between the two, when that final debate was over abortion, between the modern day Jehu and the modern day former first lady. So what everybody expected Hillary Clinton to win, but according to the paradigm, she would fall, and this Jehu figure, Trump, wins. Jehu comes to the capital city with an agenda to drain the swamp. So Trump. Now, when Jehu gets to the capital city, he sees a massive building, which is the Temple of Baal, where they have killed children. And he is responsible for tearing down the Temple of Baal. And so the thing is, interesting thing, because there actually existed a Temple of Baal from ancient times that still stood in modern times. And when Donald Trump began his rise to the presidency, when he announced his candidacy in 2015, 2 months later, the 2,000-year-old Temple of Baal comes crashing down. When Jehu rises, the temple goes down. But even that, Richard, is like a foreshadow, because the Temple of Baal, it was linked to the killing of children. So Donald Trump, listen, doesn't matter. It's not about Donald Trump. It's not about politics. It's not. But Donald Trump is actually going to be responsible more than any other president, despite himself, kind of like Jehu, is going to be responsible for tearing down this Temple of Baal, which we call Roe versus Wade, through which the children were killed. So it's amazing. Even that was like a foreshadow of what would happen. But this also is a foreshadow of January 6th, which, again, this happened after the paradigm. But here's this came true. And that is that the beginning of his rise is linked to the fall of the Temple of Baal. Well, the end of his first term, or his term as president, is going to be linked to a replaying of that template. And I will just say this, I put it in the book, but there is a time when Jehu calls the people of the nation together to the capital city. There, the people of Jehu surround a great Capitol building, and there they actually enter it and lay siege to the building while proceedings are going on. And the thing is, I won't go into all the details except to say that at the end of that week, the Capitol Police gave their announcing of the people they had arrested on site at the storming of the Capitol. And they announced 80 men, 80 men, 80 men. Well, if you go into the Bible and you look, the Bible says the number of those who entered the Capitol building of Jehu was the word shmonim ish, which means in Hebrew 80 men.
It's just also precise. It's
Yeah.
also precise and faith affirming, and faith affirming.
Yeah.
And just a quick aside, because I remember the conversation we had when the paradigm came out. You actually even calculated, because again, Hillary Clinton is a type, Jezebel is a type in the Bible, and their careers match up. You calculated the number of days, I think, or years that Jezebel was sort of on the scene, both as first lady and then later, I believe, when her son took over. She was still sort of clinging to power. She wouldn't let go. And that matches up almost exactly or precisely with Hillary Clinton.
Well, the thing is, the thing is that Jezebel was ruled with her husband on the public stage for 22 years. And well, let me do it this way. Hillary Clinton was on the public stage with Bill Clinton from governor to the end of his presidency, 22 years. Okay. And then she continued on in Washington, like Jezebel did. People don't realize, I mean, she continued on the throne, but she continued on as senator for 8 years, secretary of state for 4 more, 12 years. She retired from public life for 2 years, came back for 2 years to run for the president. Okay. So 22 years with her husband, 14 years on her own on the public stage. Jezebel, 22 years with Ahab, 14 years on her own. And in fact, Richard, I won't go into it. This is one of the things that happened when I was in bed, and it just came to me like, whoa, and then I found it was true, is that if you go, there are things in the Clinton years that actually, according to the paradigm, gives the exact date, the day, and the hour of 9/11 from this paradigm. So the point here is it's still coming true. And the war here is, which is going to continue in this mystery, is between Jehu and the Temple of Baal. So we're talking about the killing of children, and we're talking right now about Trump. And so this is all going to continue into this mystery.
So I guess we could look at Jehu's tearing down of the Temple of Baal, and that relates to Trump tearing down Roe versus Wade by appointing pro-life conservative Supreme Court judges. So let's take it back to Roe versus Wade. And how that plays into this mystery.
Yeah, this really, Roe versus Wade, in many ways, if the Temple of Baal is a vessel in which they kill children, well, Roe versus Wade was the official vessel. That's why it really goes with this Temple of Baal thing. And the thing is that it's totally connected. You know, first of all, Roe versus Wade actually began not in 73, that's when it was judged, but it began in 70 again, that 1970, when this troubled woman, Norma McCorvey, who was on drugs and drinking, and she wanted to be pregnant so she could keep drinking. She went to a lawyer, and they met in late January 1970. Go forward 50 years, late January is 2020, 50th year is when the plague begins. Roe versus Wade became a suit, was filed in March of 1970. So March is when it all hit America, you remember. But there's also a redemption here, because the Jubilee is also about God nullifying or reversing or turning around. So interesting thing, in 1970, Roe versus Wade was sent to the Supreme Court. Go forward, the 50th year, 2020, plague, but 2020, another case is sent to the Supreme Court. It's Dobbs versus Jackson, which is going to overturn, it's going to undo Roe versus Wade. Now it doesn't stop there, because the thing is that at the same time, the Roe versus Wade was taken up by the Supreme Court in May 1971. Okay, what does the Jubilee point to? May 2021 is when the Supreme Court takes up the other case, Dobbs versus Jackson. Well, then Roe versus Wade receives its hearing in the Supreme Court in December 1971. Okay, go fast forward, and you find in December 2021, the 50th year, what happens is Dobbs versus Jackson comes to the Supreme Court and gets its hearing in the Jubilean month. And then, in fact, even going further than that, remember, just before the Roe versus Wade was overturned, just before that, it was leaked to the Supreme Court was leaked.
Yes.
Well, it turns out Roe versus Wade was also leaked just before it came out. I mean, so even the leak is part of the Jubilean mystery.
It just never ends. It never ends. And in the overturning of Roe versus Wade, Dobbs versus Jackson, it was a 5-4 vote. And the deciding vote was, again, another Trump appointee, Amy Coney Barrett. How does she play into this ancient calendar?
Well, interesting. There's a principle, and in the Josiah Manifesto, I speak about the child of the Nile. And there's a principle that when you go back, when you look at really the first slaughter of children that's recorded in the Bible is what happened in Egypt, when they basically were slaughtering the Hebrew babies, the male babies. Moses was one of them who almost got slaughtered. And so as they're being thrown in the Nile, he's floating down the Nile and he escaped. So, and he would end up being that child of the Nile, I call it, would end up being the one who actually brings down the whole system in the judgment of God. He brings down the whole crushes the power of Egypt. Well, could there be a child of the Nile to America? And the interesting thing there is, in that first period of slaughter, which is that 3-year window, with the beginning, when it first became legal to kill children, there was a child born, and she would end up becoming the first Supreme Court justice to be born when her life could have been taken as a baby. The first one in fact, when she was born, Roe versus Wade, it was right when Roe versus Wade was in the Supreme Court being heard. And she now would go to the Supreme Court, the child of it, and she would go there. And when she would cast the vote, and as you rightly said, that vote was one vote, it was only one vote overturned the whole thing. And that one vote was cast when she had reached her Jubilean year, her 50th year. The child of the Nile casts the vote. And then when it's overturned, she is 50 years old. So even that, and everything had to be in its exact place. I mean, that case just had to come up at that exact moment, and which came to the Supreme Court in the Jubilee of abortion. She had to be in her Jubilee to vote that. There also had to be another justice who was removed at that exact time, which is part of another mystery I know we'll touch on. So it all had to come together. Let me just give you throw in another quick thing. And that is that there's a mystery in the Bible. There are 2 dates, and people don't have to know Hebrew to know it, but one is called Adar 13, 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. 13th day of the 12th month. That's the day of the decree that was going to bring death and destruction to the Jewish people. That's Haman's decree in the book of Esther. It's the 13th day of the 12th month. Well, Roe versus Wade was heard. Its hearing came in the Supreme Court on the 13th day of the 12th month, the day of the decree of evil and destruction. Then there was another decree in the book of Esther when Mordecai he issues a new decree that reverses the old decree and brings redemption. Well, Dobbs versus Jackson, which would undo the first decree, was sent to the Supreme Court on June 15, 2020, in the Jubilee of abortion. But the date on the Hebrew calendar was Sivan 23, which is the date of the decree that overturns the evil decree. I mean, who can make that up?
God can create that. We'll take another time out. Jonathan Cahn, the author of the Josiah Manifesto, back with more in a moment.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.
And we are back with Jonathan Cahn, who is best known for uncovering ancient mysteries and revealing their often startling significance to our day and age, which is exactly what he is doing with the latest book, the Josiah Manifesto, the Ancient Mystery and Guide for the End Times. Of course, also a best-selling author of The Harbinger, The Mystery of Shemitah, The Book of Mysteries, The Paradigm, The Oracle, The Harbinger II, The Return, and Return of the Gods as well. So another significant event that happened over the last 3 years was what's been called the Summer of Rage. Sort of in the midst of COVID, we had the untimely, unfortunate death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minnesota cop who was convicted of homicide in that death. How does this summer, and that of course set off BLM riots and Antifa riots and firebombing and looting and mass rioting across the United States was horrific. The Summer of Rage, how does that tie into this ancient calendar?
Yeah, well, the amazing thing, and this is, I open it up in a section called the Appointed Days or the Mystery Days, and that is that this ancient calendar, you alluded to it at the beginning, from the Bible, from Leviticus, that God gives of appointed days actually lies behind all these shakings that came on the nation. And the thing is, not only does it lie behind what kind of shaking is going to come, but their exact timing again. And just to kind of set the stage, the first holy day or appointed day of God is Passover. Well, what's Passover about? Passover is about, it's the only holy day that's about a plague, and it's about a plague passing through the land. So at the time when the plague was passing through the land at its peak, when everybody was in their homes, when the Jewish people were celebrating Passover and talking about the plague passing through the land in Egypt, actually a plague was passing through the land. And it's the first recorded lockdown in national history, the first national lockdown. Everybody had to be in their houses until the plague passed.
I never made that connection. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so now, not only that, so you have everybody's locked down. The Jewish people are locked down in their houses, and they're celebrating the feast of the lockdown and the plague at the time of it. All right, I'm just touching on these things. But then, what's the next great feast? It is called Shavuot in Hebrew, or in Greek, it's called Pentecost. It is the day we know of as the holy fire of God comes upon the people, the tongues of fire, the baptism of fire. It's the day of fire. Now, it's good, the good fire, but in the form of judgment. So what happens? Now it becomes the days of fire come on America. The cities are set on fire. Actually, it was the greatest civil riot or disorder in the history of America. I mean, it was over, billions of dollars of people's lives. It was just, and the thing is, here's the thing. The Jewish people began lighting their candles on May 28th to usher in this day, Shavuot, Pentecost, fire. That was the night, that was the day and night that it all broke out across America on the exact day. That's when it broke out to the cities. And that weekend when Christians were celebrating Pentecost, fires were all over the land. So that here, the day of fire now comes to the shaking of fire. Now, the next one, the next holy day after that is the day when it's called the Day of the High Court. And that is, it's the Feast of Trumpets. But that's the day when Jewish people believe that they believe that God passes judgment in the heavenly court, the court of God, and you got to get right with God. You got to get right with God on that day. The trumpet sounds, and it's the day of repentance. It's the time that begins repentance. It begins the days of awe or repentance. Well, but it's linked to God. They all pray God is on the throne, on the judgments. Here's what happens. As we approach September, the eyes of America and the world all turn to the High Court on the day of the High Court. They turn to the High Court of America, the Supreme Court. They turn to a judge. That is the day. It also says that that's the day that God determines who will live and who will die. And that's the day that the Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg passes from the court. And so it's that very act that opens up the overturning of abortion on the holy day. And the other thing is that day, listen, Richard, on that day, the Jewish people pray for a specific prayer that says, God, overturn the evil of the decree. Overturn the evil of the decree. That is the day that opened the door to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And it's the day that opened up, it's the day that opens up the repentance or the returning of and so that is when began the turning of America from Roe versus Wade on the exact day. So everything happened on the exact day.
Wow. Because of when Ginsburg died, that opened up a seat on the Supreme Court, which
Yes.
paved the way for the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett,
Yes.
whose vote overturned Roe versus Wade.
Yes.
We just need to back up for a moment, because there is also, of course, there's a very famous utterance getting back to the Summer of Rage and what precipitated the Summer of Rage. There's a very famous utterance, tragically, from George Floyd when this cop in Minnesota is kneeling on him. He says, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." That became
Yes.
sort of the rally call
Yes.
cry for the
Yes.
Antifa and the BLM. Talk to me about that. I can't breathe.
Yeah, well, you know, the day of Pentecost is, of course, when I talk about the fire of the Spirit, it's the Spirit. The word Spirit in Hebrew is ruach. It means spirit, it means wind, and it means breath. In Greek, pneuma means, you know, also the wind, the Spirit, and the breath. Breath of God. Jesus breathed on them and said, "Receive the Spirit." Well, America and the West has been turning away from God's Spirit. So it's kind of been without breath. It's been losing its life. Well, so now it's not only the times of fire, it's a time of breath. And so what happens is, during this time, it all begins with someone saying, "I can't breathe." And then it ends up with a whole rallying cry, as you said, of "I can't breathe." So here on the days of breath and fire comes in the form of shaking and judgment.
There's something in the book called the Phineas Factor. And if I remember my Bible, Phineas was a priest during the Exodus, I think.
Yes.
Do I have that right? And he killed
Yes.
he killed a woman belonging to a certain Arab tribe who I believe had been cursed by God because they were constantly waging war against the Israelites.
Well, what happened? Yeah, what happened was that Israel in its journey was basically seduced by a foreign power. And it was seduced into sin by these foreign women, sexual sin, and a plague broke out. Okay, so a plague broke out. Now here's the thing. On the day that Roe versus Wade was overturned, I'm in the airport and I hear the news. I look at my cell phone, and my cell phone, a scripture comes up that I didn't ask for. Okay, and it was something that I had researched like months before concerning the return of the gods. Okay, the book that I was finishing. And so, by the way, I finished the Return of the Gods on that day is the day that Roe versus Wade was broken. I mean, on the day. There's a thing to that. So it's an altar of God. So I look, and it appears, and it's talking about Phineas, and it's talking about the plague that broke out, and Phineas took an action and ended the plague. So I wondered. I said, well, the Supreme Court just took an action today, and I said, could this be linked to the lifting of the plague? And so I look back now. And I look back when they actually voted. That's when it was released. But when they actually voted was actually at the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022. Judge Samuel Alito is working on the resolution. That's what got leaked. He's working on the decision that's going to end Roe versus Wade. He's working in January of 2022. He's working on that decision. And then at the end of that, at the beginning of February, he releases it to the Supreme Court. Then it gets handed down later. But that's when it actually was sealed, when he did it, right? The amazing thing, Richard, is when you go back to that 2022, this is the third year, January, the plague is raging. It was actually at its height. It actually was 3 times higher than any other peak in the 3 years of COVID. So it looked like it was going on for years, okay? So now Alito finishes that draft at the end of January, beginning of February. When you look at the CDC, it says all of a sudden, it plunges right then. That's when it plunges. When they made the decision, plunges goes to, if you can believe this, within a few weeks, it's down to 1/8 of what it was, and it never came back. It was 1/8 of what it was. It plunges like 80-something%, almost 90%. And here's another thing. And so it happened just when the Supreme Court voted and made the decision. Now, the other thing was that when you look at the death rate now that's the infection rate, death rate also plunges, but the CDC gives the date when it reaches peak and then plunged. And you know what the date it gives? It says the week ending the week of January 22nd, 2022. Okay, now here's the thing. Roe versus Wade is January 22nd, 1973. The Jubilean year of Roe versus Wade begins on January 22nd, 2023. That's the exact date that the plague begins to plunge and then disappear and then goes. I mean, the Phineas Factor actually has turned the plague away. I mean, like clockwork again, to the exact day.
What is the sign of the broken altar, and what does it mean for America's future?
Well, let me, to a slight backtrack in that, because there's links to all this together. We were led to have a gathering in Washington called the Return, which was to repent. I mean, it says, if my people, will humble themselves and pray. So we gathered on the National Mall in that year of 2020, the year of when everything was shut down, mass. We gathered there, had thousands and thousands of Christians gathered on September 26th to repent for America. And we had no idea, but that day turned out on the ancient calendar was called Shabbat Shuvah. It's the day that means the day of the return. We had the return on the day of the return. Didn't know what we were doing. And the thing is, that's the day appointed for a nation to return, to repent of its sins. Now, we're praying very much about abortion. I actually, on the stage, on the National Mall, I smashed the potter's jar of Jeremiah because I felt that was all about, the killing of children. We prayed. At the very end, it turned out that very day, Trump decided to choose that day to set in motion Amy Barrett, which would overturn abortion on the day of the turning, on the very day. So he had no idea, but he chose that day. So it's the day of the turning. That set in motion the overturning of abortion. Abortion is the altar, is the most brazen altar we have. It has killed over 60 million children. The breaking of the breaking of Roe versus Wade is the breaking of the altar. This is a major thing. Now, let me just tell you one thing that happened. Near the very end, I was led that we have to sound the shofar and to seal it all. Seal it. It's 5 o'clock. I said, now we're going to seal all the prayers that we prayed, all that. And the sound of the shofar, the power of God go forth. And I said, go. And all these men sound the shofar. And I told everybody, thousands of people on the National Mall, everybody shout like Jericho. Okay, we did that. At that exact moment, Trump opens his mouth at the White House lawn and sets in motion the overturning of abortion. At that moment, it was 5 o'clock when I said go, when they sounded the shofar, 5 o'clock, 4 minutes and 33 seconds. That's the exact second that Trump opened his mouth. Literally, the overturning of abortion began in that year of Jubilee with the sound of the shofar, the sound of God's power, the sound of Jericho. And Trump, his name in English means trumpet. He sounded, the trumpet sounded, and literally history was altered by the power of God. I mean, how amazing. So let me just bring this to the home there. And that is, so what is the sign of the broken altar? God has broken that altar. I mean, abortion is not over by a long shot, but it was the breaking of an altar. It was major. And this was the hand of God. In the Bible, this is a sign of Josiah. Josiah is the king more than anybody else is linked to the broken altar. And that is many things. Number one, that was a sign that there can be revival, because the sign of revival in ancient times was the broken altar. When they turned back to God, they broke the altars. Josiah, but it's also a sign that Josiah was more linked to that broken altar. He broke the altars of the gods, and he broke the altars of Hinnom, where they were killing children.
Right. We should just a brief word on Josiah. He came to the throne when he was like 8 years old.
Yes.
He reigned for 30 years.
Yes.
And he sort of reestablished, the religious mores of Israel, got rid of Baal worship and all of that.
Yes. And the thing is, here's the thing. All these things we're talking about are converging on this one moment, which is the breaking of the altar. This is a hand of God. And that all converges on Josiah. His birth was actually announced when God broke an altar supernaturally. And then he was the one who broke more altars than anyone. And so the thing is this, Josiah really holds the key. Number one, we're at the Josiah moment. That means number one, the hour is late. Josiah came near the end of his kingdom, just before he was going to be judged. He held off the judgment. One man held off the judgment. So on one hand, it's a warning that the time is late. America and the West, we are standing at a crossroads of judgment. Number one. Number two, there can be revival. God is giving us an opening. The Josiah moment is telling us that. The key is Josiah. That's why the last part of the book, which when I call it the manifesto, is the manifesto. And that is, what are the keys from Josiah that are really the keys that we need to use and know right now to stand for no matter what happens to America or Canada or the West, no matter whether, number one, can there be revival? Yes. Can one person or one generation change the course of history? Yes. But even if it goes down the course of judgment and persecution, what do we do in persecution? God is never finished. How do we overcome in the end times? So the last 100 pages of the book are basically the manifesto of Josiah. And so all these mysteries are kind of opening this up. What do we need to do? How do we need to stand? How do we need to overcome? Really, this is all pointing to one life and one person, where it really gives the key to the end times, and that God is never finished. And we have a role to play.
We can each be a Josiah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we are called to be. Listen, Josiah was destined for his time, and it was a time of apostasy. They were killing children. They had sexual immorality. They had issues with gender, just like we did. The gods, it was all that. And yet Josiah, even though his father was apostate, his grandfather was evil, he didn't matter. He overturned it all. And God is calling us in the end times. End times are not just for darkness. It's light in the darkness. He was appointed for the day in which he was born. I was appointed, you were appointed, we are all appointed for the day in which we are born. We are not to fear the end times. This can be the greatest moment. When you look back at the book of Acts, they didn't have a Christian culture. They had an anti-Christian culture, and yet they were the brightest lights. So if the dark is getting darker, it's time for the lights of God to get brighter. And this is the time really that could be the greatest moment if we rise. But one of the things I talk about, we have to get radical. The days of cultural Christianity are ending. We have to get radical. We have to get revolutionary. We have to become prophetic. We have to go all out, and God will honor that. God, this is our hour. That's why I knew I had to write the book.
The Josiah Manifesto, the ancient mystery and guide for the end times. Let's just take a moment and tell my listeners how they can get a copy of this important book.
Yeah, and I don't have it in front of me when we talked before. I had the first copy, but you can see it. The Josiah Manifesto is literally everywhere. If you go anywhere online, any bookstore, even Walmart has it, but Amazon has it right now if you go on there. But you can get it also, for people in your life who need to know and need to hear and need to really fulfill their calling. So it's the Josiah Manifesto everywhere. Wherever books are, that's where they are.
Jonathan, always a tremendous pleasure and honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for this.
My honor. Thank you, Richard.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks, as always, for sticking me in your ear. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, please consider becoming a premium subscriber. It's real easy. Just click on the link in the episode description, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. There are 3 monthly tiers or programs to choose from. Choose the one that's right for you. Basically, you gain access to commercial-free listening. You receive bonus episodes. You get a subscription to my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, discounts on Strange Planet merchandise, and much more. strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Just click on the link. What if much or even most of what we think we know about U.S. history or North American history, certainly pre-Columbus history, is wrong. I think many of us suspect that, and we've dedicated a number of programs to that very notion on this podcast over the years. But what if we could utilize AI, artificial intelligence, to help investigate some of these historical mysteries? Well, that is, in fact, the subject of a new book that's in the works right now. And the two principals involved in this project are with me. David Edward has been with us several times. He served as a special agent in the U.S. Army in the 1980s and 90s and is a veteran of multiple overseas combat tours. He was the special agent in charge of the 1990 Panama Canal Counterterrorism Threat Assessment Report to the U.S. Congress. He's a United States Army Intel School graduate, where he studied advanced human intelligence and battlefield counterintelligence, also completing training at the Jungle Operations Training Center in Panama, Central America. He holds advanced degrees in engineering, including a doctorate in engineering, 3 related Master of Science degrees, an undergraduate degree in business. He's currently the director at the Institute for Advanced Christian Research and is the author of over 50 books. His best-selling thriller, Panama Red, has sold over 250,000 copies and is based on true events, chronicling U.S. military activities during Noriega's 1980s dictatorship and exposes the early stages of the child trafficking crisis we face today. David Edward, welcome. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, Richard. When you read that, it just reminds me how old I am.
I need a whole show to list your accolades. John Levy has, with a blend that's part rich coffee beans, part fiery passion, and part entrepreneurial grind. I love the coffee metaphors. John Levy has brewed success for over 2 decades in the coffee business, but John's flavor palette extends beyond just coffee. He's chosen the adventurous path of setting up home on a vast 20-acre plot near Utah's mysterious Skinwalker Ranch, proving his mettle and penchant for unique off-grid experiences. In contrast, digitally, he's a force to be reckoned with. Through his @JohnLevy Channel YouTube channel, John delves into the overlooked and mysterious corners of history. With a dedicated audience of nearly 300,000 subscribers, John's continually shaking up perceptions and helping us separate fact from fiction. His meticulous research doesn't just challenge the status quo, it filters out the myths, leaving behind the rich aroma of historical truth. John Levy, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Oh, good. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's get just kind of an overview here of how artificial intelligence could be used to investigate, let's call them historical anomalies.
Yeah, I'm going to let John introduce it, but just to kick it off, I'll give just a quick background. John has been researching this stuff for 5 years, a very long time. He's compiled hundreds of hours of video evidence and research, and he and I connected, and I started pulling some of that research and plugging it into the different AI algorithms and stuff. Because one of the things, I'm pretty into AI at this point. I'm programmatically into it, and it started spitting back all kinds of cool things that we'll talk about. But John, do you want to kind of lay the foundation?
Yeah, I think that was a good kind of introduction to it. What I've been doing is just looking into history and simply what history tells us about everything, every aspect of our country and how the buildings were built. And I started to find anomalies and a kind of repeated theme. A lot of buildings were built in the 1800s in 1 year. And when you look at these buildings, you realize we couldn't build that today, let alone in the 1800s in 1 year, with horse and buggy, pre-power tools. And it just opened up a can of worms and sent me down a rabbit hole for over 5 years now, where history doesn't seem to make sense. And
Could
so
you,
I just plug away week
John,
after week. Yes.
sorry, I wonder if you could give me an example, because that is so, what you were just describing there about these buildings, these magnificent edifices, prior to the brutalist architecture, school of architecture was just a blight on humanity. I think there's an example, there was a beautiful federal building in Chicago, and the dome is actually bigger than the U.S. Capitol building. And it was built fairly quickly. And then like within a couple decades, they tore it down inexplicably. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
That's exactly the kind of thing. And it's one after another, one after another. And everybody has one of these buildings that they remember from their past. A beautiful over-the-top building that gave you a feeling that the cathedrals give you. I mean, they're so massive with their marble and their steps and their Corinthian columns, resembling European architecture in many cases. And then when they get torn down, it breaks our hearts. And everybody has an example of that. Everybody's seen that. And that's what I do week after week. We look at different examples, and it's very heartbreaking when they tore them down, but many of them still exist, including our very capital. I mean, our capital wasn't built in 1 year necessarily, but the nation's capital was built in 1793 to 1800. So that's 7 years. In 1793, I mean, we have to think about the means available. Well, that's what David has done, is he's actually getting the information of what it would take, things that we couldn't really completely calculate, and have the AI make sense of it. And it was my suspicion that this would all be impossible. Even as a builder myself, viewers of the channel leaving comments and emails, they're in the building industry. It's logistically impossible in these time frames. Perhaps in the time that we're living even now, Notre Dame, the cathedral in Paris, it's going to take 20 years just to rebuild the roof. And yet we have examples of cathedrals that have been built in 1 year with the same intricacy as the European cathedrals.
So this is this is where the artificial intelligence or the algorithms come in. You're doing what, David? Making calculations or using AI to make calculations for you to determine what some of these grandiose edifices would have required in terms of manpower and materials and hours?
Yeah. So what we're doing, there's this guy named Morton J. Adler, who was a philosopher and educator from the 1940s. He created the world's list of great books or something like that, and then he indexed it. He created something called the Syntopicon, and when he did that, he created a methodology called syntopical analysis. So this is basically looking broadly, and he outlines it, and there's different layers to it, but it's looking broadly across documents, assets, maps, literature, books, all of that, identifying themes, translating those themes into ideas, and then indexing those ideas against each other, so you can see where Plato and Kant and Aristotle and Thomas Jefferson, say, are all talking to each other and having that conversation. So we took that framework basically as a matrix, and then we're dumping in these stories, and let's call them narratives, because that's what we call them. So for example, one of the buildings we're starting with is Fort Point in San Francisco, which is a star fort that was built before the Civil War. And we're starting to say, okay, let's look at the narrative of that construction, and let's compare that narrative to other buildings that we get in that same time period. And we hand all those into the AI and then ask it questions. So one of the questions I ask is, based on all of these definitions, is there a template, or is there some structure to the history? And I mean, yeah. And what came back was, it actually produced, which we're putting in the book, it produced the template, the narrative template that all of these histories are based upon. And it's like a formula, like when you're a little kid and you got the old purple steno and you had to do your work on it, or you do the Mad Libs, right, where it's already written and you put the words in. So it's the same kind of thing, that the timing, the architect, the materials, all of that stuff turns out is a template pattern that is stamped all over North America. Now, we started with North America because it's the simplest history to unravel. If we were to try and go to the Parthenon in Greece and claim that that was built, whatever, it's just there's so many layers to that.
Right.
It's
Civilization
hard.
and on top of civilization, North American's history is only several hundred years old, so it's
Yeah,
pretty clean, pretty simple.
It's
one would
cleaner.
think.
And we also, yeah, and we started looking at the West Coast because that's even cleaner. And we forget, we romanticize so many things, but John, John, the house he's sitting in, he built himself. And I owned a construction company for like 6 years. I was just telling him I dug more footers than I think anyone on the planet over that period. So you got to have that practical experience to understand what construction really is, because a lot of us, we're sitting in our chair in our air conditioning, drinking our Diet Coke like I am right now, and we think, oh yeah, 200 people laying 650 bricks for 11 years, piece of cake, they can do that. It's like, try it for 3 days, that kind of thing. So the AI identified that, and it also identified patterns that I wouldn't have picked up on. Like San Francisco, for example, it turns out in the historical narrative of many of the buildings built in the 1850s, early 1850s, so 1853 to 1856, part of these buildings, and there's more than 50 of them, part of their narrative is that the granite was imported from China. Okay.
Yeah.
For a couple of, why is that important? Why, of all the things you're going to tell us in the 2 paragraphs about the building, why is that one that keeps repeating itself everywhere? And then what we did, and we used the AI, and we said, okay, let's look at the volume of the buildings, the timings, the sourcing. Let's look at what we know about the Pacific trade routes, about the materials, and the logistics of bartering with China to get the granite. I think, and John, if you remember, it was something like, just in this one Fort Point, it's something like 27 million cubic pounds of, or cubic, pounds, 27 million pounds of granite, which is over 13 tons of granite. Was supposedly sourced from China in a year to lay the foundation for Fort Point. Well, okay. Then we went back and we said, okay, well, what ships would they have put it on? And there's this thing called barks that are 3-mast ships, which would have been the standard cargo transport. Well, how much can they carry? About 500 tons. Okay, but they don't load them to capacity. And we do all that math. It's like, okay, so it would have taken 35 ships loaded 80% with granite to get the foundation for Fort Point, who is competing with 49 other buildings for granite. And that kind of stuff is what we're unraveling. And what happens is, John has identified the contradiction, right, or the weirdness, and what we're finding is that it doesn't even survive the simplest scrutiny, and it all falls apart. And we're actually being able to trace deep into why it falls apart, and that's part of what we're showing in North America anyway.
So, well, let's continue on with some other examples, because this is fascinating. I mentioned that Chicago Federal Building. Chicago had a World's Fair. I think you may have talked about this on your YouTube channel, John. Chicago had a World Fair, and they had all of these amazing buildings that they put up, over the course of 2 years?
Yep, and even less. Yeah, a little less than 2 years. They built over 100 buildings. And they're beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful. And we are told that they're temporary. And so that's a great example. I mean, building it, or, are you really building 100 buildings in this time period? Nowadays we might use tents, or we could imagine tents, for a carnival or a circus, or, I mean, that was essentially what this event was all about. I mean, do we do that today? Would we build an entire city with a lakefront, with fountains? How can those things even be temporary, really? I mean, you have stone up against a lake, up against a building. And in my opinion, anyone who looks at those pictures should understand that you can't erect, 100-foot buildings, for example, that are temporary. And the
So,
federal
you know,
building is a beautiful example. I absolutely love that building. And it just makes no sense in this time period. All these buildings, Penn Station is a great example. Penn Station, how the community was outraged when they tore it down. It doesn't really make sense. It begs to ask the questions, you know. I mean, why are in this early time period when resources should be so valuable, and it should be more difficult than today to build these structures, why are we just tearing them down?
Right.
Even in
Well,
San Francisco, you know, they had a great fire, we're told,
mhm.
but they also, after the fire, they just started demolishing buildings. And even during the fire, they tell us during the fire, they were demolishing with dynamite buildings preemptively so that the fire wouldn't spread. So it seems unusual to have such ease of building in short time periods, demolishing and then building again. And that's how our history looks. It's almost like they had the magical wand and money was no object and labor was no object and materials were no object.
Right. Well, granted, labor costs were pretty inexpensive back then, but that doesn't account for,
Not having cranes and
exactly.
Mhm.
well, and you have to have the people too. But John, I haven't even talked about this. Last night, what I was doing is I was going through the Chicago World's Fair, Richard, that you mentioned, and also through the San Francisco World's Fair. And one of the nice things that AI can do is that you can load up an image and it can identify cloning, and meaning where little pieces of the image are reused, usually to hide stuff. It can also look at the way the file is compressed, and it can identify layers. So if a photo is faked, if you copy and paste a crowd of people in front of a building, it can identify the different the JPEG compression levels, and you can see the pieces. And I was actually doing that with the Chicago World's Fair last night. And what's interesting is I forget, it wasn't the Philadelphia library. One of the libraries had a repository of pictures. I was going through them. Every picture that shows the big central water canal with that big gold statue in it,
Yes.
every single one of those comes up as manipulated, and it's usually the gold statue. And the other thing, on almost every picture of San Francisco in the 1800s, or of the San Francisco World Fair, or of the Chicago World's Fair, and those are the ones I've done so far, almost every one of those pictures, the tops of the buildings, the flagpoles, are all digitally manipulated for some reason. I don't know
What are
why.
your
We don't know
source
why yet.
images? What are your source images from the Chicago Tribune, or what, if it was
Yeah.
around in 1893, or
No, what they have is a lot of libraries, especially local libraries, like San Francisco has I'm going to get the name. It's like the something San Francisco Historic Library of
okay.
San Francisco, something
Yeah,
like
the
that.
digital archives. And that's another
Yeah.
thing, is it's actually very difficult to obtain a lot of these photos. When we really want to get serious, we have to go to all these obscure little places and little separate libraries that hold these digital collections. And so I never heard about the World's Fair, really. I never learned anything about that in school. And it's really interesting. All of this architecture and history is really, really interesting. It's some of the most interesting history that I've found. And yet it's stuff that I never learned about. And people are actually very interested to learn about it.
So
once
what is the point then of, I'll tell you what, we'll take a time out, we'll come back, and we'll get into, why these images are being manipulated, why the AI algorithms, it doesn't add up, in terms of the material, and how these amazing structures could have been built in such a short amount of time. What is this all leading us to? Back with more of my conversation with John Levy and David Edward right here on Strange Planet. Don't go away.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship. Enjoy the complete unedited episodes and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.
We are back with David Edward and John Levy, and they're working on a new book examining or investigating historical mysteries using artificial intelligence. And the new book is Evidence of the Old World. Is that the working title?
Yes, that is the working title.
Okay, and you sort of described it as what? Fingerprints of the gods, maybe with the lens turned to modern day, or let's say
Well,
19th,
we're
20th
calling
century America?
Yeah, yeah, and that was just for you. I'm not claiming that I am a writer of that caliber, but that's generally the idea. Is yeah, we're basically looking at history, and we are. It's a very methodical and detective-like approach. I'm trying to learn everything. You know, when you read my intro, it is true that I was trained by the United States Army on how to investigate counterintelligence matters. I keep FM 60, the field manual for investigations, on my desk. So we're very much treating this like a legitimate detective investigation, and we're looking for what you just asked, Richard. It's the right question. What did they have the means? Did they have the opportunity? And then what on earth could the motive have been? And that's what we're trying to chronicle. They clearly had the means. John has discovered it. He's reverse engineered. They did it. They had the means to alter history. Now, what we have to develop, did they alter the narrative, the story of these buildings, or is there more to the construction of the buildings? We've got to develop that. We have our own ideas, but they had the opportunity. And John, one of the things you point out in one of your videos, if you go look at what all the companies were popping up in all these towns, they're all publishing companies and photo companies. It's like the weirdest industry that shows up early in these towns.
And auction companies.
Yeah,
auctioneers of land and real estate at this very early time period.
Yeah.
You know,
so,
I think what we're doing is nothing that anyone who's interested in ancient history wouldn't do with the pyramids or with you know, the ruins of Yonaguni underwater, or just any of these really clearly old structures. What we're doing is bringing the timeline back and asking those same questions. Is it possible? I think everyone can agree that the mainstream idea of the pyramids and how they built them is pretty ridiculous, as far as the things, you know, that have been taught in school. But it's the same thing when you look at all these buildings from the 1800s. They really are at a place, overly sized, and unnecessary, you know, hence why they tear them down, because they're, you know, oftentimes in history, they tell us that they were too drafty and they, you know, were too big and the doors were too big and they were hard to maintain. So they tear them down. And it doesn't make sense why any people would attempt to, you know, build something that big.
Another classic example would be the Singer Tower in New York City, which I think for about a year was the tallest building in the world. Was it 60 floors? It's this pencil thin building. I don't know how long it took to build, but they suddenly decided to tear it down in the 60s, and their excuse was, well, there's not enough office space or something like that.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example. And
let me give you this, so like Richard, you wanted some specific examples.
Yeah.
Here's another one. And this one came out, was discovered in 2012, but no one did anything with it. You know, the lost colony of Roanoke
Off North Carolina. Yes.
in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And famously, John White left, came back 3 years later, and then they were all gone, and his daughter and his granddaughter were missing, and they searched for him, and he made a map when he was looking. And this became relevant because this is 1857, which ties back to the history of San Francisco that we can get to. We were just looking for maps and stuff. And in 2012, they scanned the map because there's a patch on it, kind of up a river, where at a fork in the river. And underneath the patch was a star fort. Well, what's a star fort doing on? I mean, this is the lost colony of Roanoke. These are people in the most inhospitable, country in the world, and they all die.
Yeah. I think you said 1857. It's 1587.
Sorry,
the colony.
I have that, my little dyslexia, which of course makes all this. Yeah, 1587. Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you for
what is
correcting
this?
me. Yeah,
What is a star fort?
that is exactly the question that we asked. It's like, well, why? Well, first off, what is it? And then secondly, why would they hide it? Well, a star fort. Well, actually, John, why don't you're much better explaining this than I am. Do you want to give the high level overview of the star fort?
That's a great segue into star fort. Everybody's seen a star fort, but probably not realized they were looking at one. The Statue of Liberty is sitting on a star fort. The pedestal, the massive, oversized, star-shaped pedestal, which is essentially a building, which is a fort, is a star fort. And they've just stuck the statue, and actually everything under the statue is very impressive. It fits the same bill of what we're talking about. There's no reason that this massive fortification should be built out on an island in such an early time period. Now you have 3 other forts, star-shaped forts, right around the Statue of Liberty on Governor's Island. And once somebody points out these star-shaped fortresses to you in America, it changes everything, because that is certainly something that we were never really taught about or had any explanation to how those could have been built. In Florida, you have a Fort Jefferson. I forget the year of Fort Jefferson, very, very early time period, 17 million bricks on an island, and it has a star shape. And what we find is these American star fortifications that are beyond anything. They are some of the most massive of buildings. I mean, forget about the ones that we're talking about, in New York City and things like that, in Chicago. I mean, these things are coastal fortifications, and it absolutely makes no sense. So what we've found, and there's thousands of these forts all over the world. I mean, thousands, and there's websites now, and it's kind of something that developed within my research and within the community that does this kind of research. There's a group of people now doing this research, and we all come together, we all share, and there are so many of these similarities that it begs to ask, could this be something grander than just national? If we find these same star-shaped geometric beauty and precision with these star fortifications. David, weren't you telling me 14 feet thick walls?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to the Fort Morgan in Florida because I was curious. These things. So here's the story. So here's the story on star forts. Good point. Go. Yeah. So the story is, people figured out that cannons were bad, so they figured out if they built walls, that they could be below, the cannonballs might not hit them. So they started building, and that's the theory. And then in the U.S. after the War of 1812, which we maintain our sovereignty, but we kind of got our butts kicked a little bit. We realized that our coastal fortifications weren't that good. So through a long story, they came up with this thing called the third system. So this is going to be the third system of fortifications, and it is what became all of these star forts. There's maybe 25 of them.
In America, though, the third fort is just in America.
Sorry.
Otherwise, in the
Yes.
rest of the world, they're called bastion forts typically.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So they link, but they're built with this. So it's the most difficult building you could ever imagine to build. It uses a masonry technique called Flemish bonding, which is just this wildly complicated structure. The walls are 7 to 14 feet thick, and they're supposed to be these amazing military strategic positions. What we found is that every single star fort fell almost immediately when it was attacked during the Civil War. None of them held. They were all built using 200 something. This is part of that pattern, right? So in San Francisco, Fort Point, which is a star fort, we're told was built with 200 converted gold miners. Fort Morgan in Florida, that I went to and visited, we're told was built with 200 leased slaves. So, and we've done all this reverse engineering. For Fort Morgan, we're told uses 30 million cubic yards of masonry brick, not 30 million brick, but 30 million yards of brick. So the question is, okay, 200 leased slaves over 6 years in this island in Mobile Bay, Alabama. How would they build it? And you go look at it, and we have pictures of all this, but it's like a Roman bath. It's just the most beautiful building you could imagine. And it makes no sense. The narrative makes no sense. And everywhere we look at star forts, everything I just told you about the third system is accurate, and everyone failed. They're all over-engineered and absolute complete military failures, and the materials are nearly impossible to have acquired, and the labor force that built them it is an unskilled labor force that somehow managed to produce the best masonry in the world.
So in other words, they weren't, if I'm reading you correctly or hearing you correctly, these fortifications weren't actually built as forts. They had some other purpose. Because they're militarily, well, you say they were a failure. There's something else, but it also points to a global civilization that built these all over the world.
You're a smart man, and you're jumping to the back of the book. That I think that's where this leads. But we truly are being methodical. So we started with the simplest thing we could think of, which is, where did the name for San Francisco come from? And even that completely falls apart in the narrative. But pretty soon you wind up with star forts, and then pretty soon you wind up with this masonry technique, this Flemish bond, and then pretty soon you look at all of the other buildings that were built in this same style at the same time, which of course would have competed for the same resources and laborers. And I think the conclusion is going to be something like where you just ended up, which is, it sure does seem to point to exactly the same stuff we see being built all over the world. Some of that architecture is revered, and we're told the stuff here in the U.S. was disposable, or it was built for the war, but then they didn't use it, or it fell, or all that stuff. So that is the picture that is coming out of all of this work. Absolutely.
And so tearing down the Singer Tower, destroying that Chicago Federal Building, these temporary structures at the Chicago World Fair in 1893, which I think was to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. They were done away with, what, to bury the tracks, to throw us off the trail. That these
don't know.
Potentially that's one option, or just for someone to sell real estates, for example. A lot of these weren't needed. They weren't needed then, really, and we see a pattern of repurposement. So all these buildings in this time period for 100 years up until present day are going to get shuffled around when you start looking at the history. So this building is going to be a courthouse, and then it's going to get converted to maybe a high school and maybe a church. And they don't make sense. Sometimes they look like castles, overly built, and eventually torn down because really it's not exactly what somebody wants.
Let me give you an example. that star fort that we said we found on the 1587, I'll say it right this time, John White map. The University of North Carolina got interested in that site in 2007. They wound up scanning the map in 2012, because that's how academia works. By 2009, they had flash produced a golf course on that spot and completely destroyed it before the star
That's
fort was
it.
discovered.
Great point for bringing that up. Yeah. So a golf course is more important than a historic site, especially with the masonry, the Flemish technique. And so somebody thought so. Somebody thought golfing was more important. And golf courses are a repeated theme. In fact, we see that over and over.
In
Yeah,
order
I mean,
to,
so- but-
in order
and they
to,
got that-
sorry, in order
No, I
to
was just saying-
obliterate the star fort, to erase it.
It's a frustrating. It is. You know, we're developing. We'll propose our thoughts on what the motive might be, but yeah, we're still just identifying this. And the scope of this is ridiculous, and it's scary because, like I said, with this particular example in North Carolina, they got in front of the researchers by like a year and a half and commissioned a golf course. I mean, think of it. This is it's one of the first East Coast maps. The Roanoke mystery is one of the biggest mysteries we have in the country. All we do is talk about it. It's even taught in schools. And then they discover this magic patch that for 300 years no one bothered to look at. By the way, okay, I guess I'll buy that. Then as soon as it becomes mainstream, just a year ahead of time, they blew the place up and it's gone. And we see that pattern everywhere. We see it in San Francisco. We see it everywhere we look. And one of the challenges that John and I are having as we write this book is there's too much information. We can't, if we just show everything, you just get overwhelmed. There was a video he did within the past, I don't know, year or two, where he had a book and he was going over the 1 year wonders, and he must have done like 30 or 40 of them, John. And they were all like built in 1 year, destroyed 17 years later, destroyed five years later. It's just the volume of it is insane.
We'll take another time out. David Edward and John Levy, stay with us. We're talking about historical mysteries and how these investigations are being conducted using artificial intelligence. This will be the subject of a brand new book called Evidence of the Old World, perhaps Volume 1. We'll come back in a moment.
What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.
We're back with David Edward and John Levy, and the YouTube channel is at John Levy Channel on YouTube. Where is it weekly, John, that you explore these mysteries?
Yep, every week, about a 20-minute episode.
and over or approaching 300,000 subscribers. And what are we looking at? An archive of about what, 300, 400 videos?
Yeah, about 300 videos now.
There's that much material out there that can justify 300 plus videos.
It's overwhelming, actually. There's no end to. I'm learning every day. Every day, and history is really fascinating when you begin going down this rabbit hole, because most of these architectural wonders nobody's ever seen before.
When we're talking about some of these beautiful buildings, let's say, for example, the Chicago World's Fair, um, wasn't someone keeping a diary when these structures were going up? Don't we have kind of a step-by-step journal or diary? That's, you're holding up the book there, David. What is it?
This is for the 1851 Philadelphia exhibition. But yes, the meticulous diary, and these things, this is one of the creepiest books that I've ever read. This is the 1851 Philadelphia one. There is one for the Chicago one and all the others. I don't know, you won't be able to see it. I know the people listening can't see it, but it's like the densest text I've ever seen.
Wow.
And it reads like an instruction manual, because they capture absolutely everything, every exhibit. I'm trying to find something with all the technology that was on display. I know it's hard for you to see it, but it's all meticulously diagrammed in here. Everything from the steam engine to baby incubators to how to grow corn to what a school desk should look like, you name it. And it's and the, you know, I'm trying to stay away from concluding anything, but if I stumbled on an ancient Inca city that no one had ever heard of, that political forces were going to tear down, and I had 3 years, what would I do? I would make a book like this, and I would document the heck out of it. So someone is documenting the heck out of all of these world fairs, and the legacy of them is not the. How long are they usually up, John? 3 months, 6 months, something like that. It's like a ridiculously short period.
Yeah, I mean, you figure you have winter, so you don't even have a good full year.
Yeah, it's they're up for a very short period of time, but the amount of technology documentation that comes out of them is staggering.
So are there any buildings from the Chicago World's Fair remaining, or were they all
Yes.
leveled?
Yes, yes, and there are, and that's what's really interesting, is that kind of takes away from the idea that these buildings were built as temporary buildings. They are just as beautiful and permanent as anything we'd see in the nation's capital. That the same columns that seem to be made of one piece of polished marble. So there is a lot that remains, and St. Louis had a similar World's Fair, and there's a lot for us to look at. There's still a lot of examples of this architectural style, and when you read the history for not just the World's Fair, but all of these buildings in history, what you get is a good explanation to who the architect was and maybe where the funding came from, and that's pretty much it. You don't get the details of where were the bricks coming, how were they shipped. There were so many questions that need answered that aren't there, that just don't exist. These stories are paper thin in the end.
Right. And again, if you ran the algorithm using the artificial intelligence, it just wouldn't add up. It's
doesn't
not
add up.
feasible.
Well, it doesn't, and we have lots of information to feed the thing. In fact, we got the balance sheets for every World's Fair from 1793 to 1971, and we're feeding that into this thing. And what you discover is, we're told it was a viable business model. Well, it's not. The first 100 years, these things lost tons of money. So, and look, going back to the San Francisco one, or even the Chicago one, they're surrounded by fires. So typically, either before or after or both, there'll be a fire. And so, and I just, because San Francisco's in my head, that had several fires. These cities, we're told, including the World's Fairs, were rebuilt 4, 5, 6 times over the course of 50 years, 80 years. It doesn't make any sense. And as a person who has done construction, every building that has ever existed, including the Great Pyramid of Giza, is a temporary building. It's going to be gone. It's going to be gone at some point. So it's a silly thing to have to argue against. The other thing that John and I talk about is just the foundation work. Let's say you're building a 1 million square foot temporary building. Well, it still can't fall down and kill anybody during the fair. So the foundation takes years to put in. And they were told the entire 1 million square foot thing, including foundation, was done in 2.5 years. It's impossible. And what we're doing, and we're really going for it, because we're just going to blow the whole thing up, and we're going to show that it's impossible. What that means, I don't know. I don't know what it means. We're going to need other people to read this and comment. We're going to have ideas, but I don't know what it means. Our history is fake. In North America, our history is completely fake, and we're proving it, and we'll have it proven when the book comes out.
And that all these buildings were already here. I mean, if it's
that's the rub.
logistically
Okay.
If it's logistically impossible to do that in that time period, then the building was already there. And then when we look at old photographs, the oldest, and every photograph that's part of this research is looking at every story, every photograph, every angle, and the roads themselves are they're mud roads. I mean, they don't even have roads. So even if you could get a pallet of bricks with a team of horses on a wagon, you don't have the road to even support that weight. So before you even build anything, you need to have a grader and heavy equipment come out and lay everything out. And what we see is from day one, Washington, D.C., I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the crazy complex grid. Well, that comes first. It's not like the buildings and then you put in the first thing you do is survey everything and grade the roads with heavy machinery. I don't think any of that's possible without lasers and modern machinery and heavy equipment.
So there's the rub. These buildings were there before the formation of the United States.
Well, yeah, and what we see in the pictures is it's all presented backwards. So instead of seeing the foundation and then the crappy buildings and the okay buildings and the nice buildings, instead we see these glorious European buildings. And the construction photos, when there are any, the buildings seem to be built from the top down very consistently. In almost all of them, all of the ornate stuff that you would do, the finishing work that you would put on the top, shows up before the foundation is poured, and there's no roads. It's just it's baffling. It's just completely it's wonky. What we're trying to do is defrag it. Yeah.
Amazing. Any what's the ETA on the publication of evidence of the old world?
We're shooting for September 15th, and our fingers are crossed.
Amazing. Well, we didn't even get to the and I don't know if this is going to be the subject of the first book or whether this will come later, but this whole legend of the Tartarian Empire or civilization and how this all sort of feeds into that. If was it the Tartarian civilization responsible for the star forts and all of these amazing buildings? Go ahead, John.
I personally don't think that they're responsible. They're just one little part of the puzzle. The Tartarian thing, I think, has been maybe portrayed as that, maybe misportrayed in that regards. And yet that is just one little part of this research that we don't see these maps, the hundreds of maps that show a people, a nation of Tartaria or Tartary in that region. And it's very interesting. It rings, when I first discovered it, it seemed to ring a bell. Like, I know that name, but I don't know exactly where from. But no, I think it's unfair to say that they're responsible for everything that we see. It's not, that wouldn't be right, because they're just one little region, and we see this evidence throughout the world.
And I guess, just to close out, Richard, the other thing when it comes to that, there obviously there's lots of maps that show a lot of civilization in what's now Russia and northern Asia and stuff. Those same maps show North America populated with cities.
Mhm.
And this is dating back, with this, we're back into the 1500s. And not only do they show cities, they show very European looking cities with defensive walls. And many of the cities also have antenna and odd things on the top of the buildings. And again, these are the first maps ever made of the world. And what's fun is some of these maps, 100 or 150 years before, like San Francisco was discovered on the California coast where San Francisco is, they have the word San Francisco. Yeah. So it's like, okay, something's up. Matter of fact, like I said, the word San Francisco is on a lot of maps. We're told it was found in 1769 and then named in 1775. But we have maps going back to the 1500s that show San Francisco on the California coast. So it all falls apart. It's just the most gentlest of inquiry, and the namings don't work, the cities don't work, the technology doesn't work. And Tartaria, I think, is part of it, in that it seems to have suffered the same fate. But we're not ready yet to say that the North American component. Matter of fact, some of the maps say things like these people camped in the fields what was that, John? I sent you in the means of the Tartary, or like the Tartary do, but doesn't mean they're Tartars. And we see those in North America and in Canada, in your neck of the woods. A lot of this went on. So it's very interesting, and we're gonna expose it all.
Can of worms. Evidence of the old world, hopefully coming September the 15th. Amazon?
Amazon, we're going wide with this one. So if you can buy a book, this thing will be in there.
David Edward and John Levy, check out his YouTube channel at John Levy Channel. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
Always a pleasure.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.